Ordinary evening, at the edge of a forgotten lake, one tired father's life was about to collide with In seconds, the impossible fell from the sky, and everything he believed.
He had no idea who was trapped inside, only that somewhere beneath that sinking metal, a life was running out of time.
Hang on! We are
He didn't know the man's name, his net worth, or his empire. In that moment, he was simply a stranger who needed saving.
Come on! Breathe!
Coughs violently, gasps.
If you have ever wondered whether one small act of kindness could change the entire direction of a life, stay with this story until the very end, because what happened on that lake and what arrived the next morning will remind you why decency still matters in this world. Before we go further, if stories like this move you, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because there are so many more waiting for you. Daniel Reyes had not expected anything unusual from that Tuesday evening. He was 36 years old, a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter Lily on his own since his wife Maria had passed away from an aggressive illness 2 years earlier. He worked as a mechanic at a small auto shop on the edge of Cedar Hollow, a quiet town tucked between pine ridges and a long, glassy lake that most people only knew from fishing brochures. Money was always tight. The shop barely covered rent, groceries, and Lily's growing shoe size, and most nights Daniel came home smelling of engine oil, too exhausted to do much more than help with homework and fall asleep on the couch before he even meant to. But every Tuesday, without fail, he drove out to Miller's Lake with his old aluminum boat, not really to fish, but to breathe. It was the 1 hour of the week that belonged only to him, a quiet ritual he had kept since Maria died, sitting at the end of the dock as the sun went down, letting the stillness settle something in his chest that words never could. That evening started no differently. The lake was calm, painted gold and lavender by the setting sun, and Daniel had just cast his line when a distant, wrong sound cut through the silence. It was not the usual hum of a small aircraft passing far overhead. It was low, guttural, and getting louder, an engine straining against something it was never meant to fight. He turned in time to see a sleek white private jet, trailing black smoke from one wing, dropping altitude far too fast over the tree line. For a moment, his mind refused to process what his eyes were showing him. Planes did not fly this low over Cedar Hollow. Planes did not descend at this angle unless something had gone terribly wrong. The jet clipped the surface of the lake in an explosion of white spray, skipping once like a violently thrown stone, before the fuselage caught and the aircraft slammed down into the water with a force that sent a shockwave rippling across the entire lake. Daniel felt the concussion of impact in his chest before he even fully understood what he was looking at. Smoke rose from the crumpled nose of the plane, and the tail section had already begun tilting downward, water rushing in through some unseen breach. There were no other boats nearby, no emergency vehicles, no sirens, just Daniel, his aluminum fishing boat, and a sinking aircraft half a mile out on darkening water. He did not remember deciding to move. His body simply reacted, the same instinct that had once made him climb beneath overturned trucks to pull coworkers free years earlier, back when he still did volunteer rescue work with the county. He ripped the cord on his outboard motor, and the small boat lurched forward, cutting through choppy water toward the wreckage, his heart hammering against his ribs. As he got closer, he could see the plane sinking at an angle, one wing already fully submerged, water pouring through a jagged crack in the fuselage near the cockpit. He shouted, though he had no idea if anyone could hear him, if anyone was even still alive inside. Daniel guided the boat alongside the wreckage as carefully as he could, aware that getting too close risked being pulled under by the suction of the sinking metal. He tied a rope loosely to a jagged strut, grabbed the small flashlight from his tackle box, and climbed onto the tilting wing, water already lapping over his boots. Through a shattered window he saw movement. A man slumped forward against a jammed seatbelt, his silver hair matted with blood at the temple, an expensive suit soaked through with lake water rising past his knees inside the cabin. Daniel did not think about who the man might be. He did not notice, not yet, the gold watch on his wrist or the quiet authority etched into his unconscious face. All he saw was a person who was seconds from drowning inside a sinking metal coffin, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to act. He forced his arm through the shattered window, feeling glass bite into his skin, and worked the jammed seatbelt buckle with trembling, freezing fingers until it finally gave way. The man's body slumped toward him, heavier than expected, and Daniel had to brace his whole weight against the tilting frame of the plane to keep them both from sliding into the flooding cabin. Inch by inch, he hauled the unconscious stranger through the broken window, water rushing around them both as the plane groaned and sank deeper. By the time he dragged the man's limp body onto the wing, the water was already at Daniel's waist, and the aircraft was tilting at a dangerous angle that told him they had only seconds left before it went under completely. He half-carried, half-dragged the stranger to the boat, rolling him over the side just as the plane's tail dipped fully beneath the surface behind them with a final, hollow gurgle. The stranger was not breathing. Daniel had learned CPR years ago during his volunteer rescue training, and without hesitation, he began chest compressions, counting under his breath, the boat rocking gently beneath them in the debris-strewn water. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only moments, the man convulsed, water spilling from his mouth as he gasped violently back to life, his eyes fluttering open in confusion and pain. It was only then, guiding the boat back toward the dock with the stranger propped against the hull, that Daniel got a better look at him. Despite being soaked and battered, there was something unmistakably composed about the man's face, an authority that did not fade even in near-death confusion. His suit, though ruined, was clearly tailored, and a small monogram was stitched into the collar, the initials M.W. Daniel thought little of it at the time. He was simply relieved the man was alive. By the time they reached the dock, Daniel had already called emergency services on the cracked phone he kept in his truck for lake trips, and paramedics arrived within 20 minutes, along with, strangely, a black SUV that had appeared even faster than the ambulance. Two men in dark suits stepped out, speaking urgently into earpieces, identifying themselves only as security personnel for Mr. Whitfield. It was the first time Daniel heard the name that would soon mean so much more than he could have imagined. Marcus Whitfield, founder and chairman of Whitfield Global Holdings, one of the wealthiest men in the country, had been flying to a private retreat when his jet's engine failed catastrophically over Cedar Hollow. Daniel gave a brief statement to the paramedics, declined to go to the hospital himself despite a gash on his forearm, and drove home that night soaked, shivering, and utterly unaware that the man he had pulled from the lake controlled a business empire spanning logistics, energy, and technology sectors worth billions of dollars. He picked Lily up from his sister's house, told her only that he had helped someone who had an accident on the lake, tucked her into bed and fell asleep still smelling of lake water and jet fuel, thinking the whole ordeal was over. It was not over, not even close. The next morning, Daniel was woken before sunrise by the sound of engines outside his modest, single-story home on the edge of town. He assumed it was a neighbor or perhaps the auto shop calling him in early. Instead, when he pulled back the curtain, he found himself staring at three identical black Cadillac Escalades parked along his gravel driveway, their engines idling, several men in dark suits standing beside them with quiet, patient composure. For a moment, Daniel's stomach dropped, an old fear surfacing, wondering if somehow he was in trouble, if something about the rescue had gone wrong. Instead, the rear door of the middle vehicle opened, and Marcus Whitfield himself stepped out, dressed now in a simple charcoal overcoat, a small bandage still visible near his temple, his expression calm but unmistakably emotional. He walked up Daniel's cracked driveway without hesitation, extended his hand, and said only, "You didn't know who I was last night. That's exactly why I'm here." What followed over the next hour reshaped the entire trajectory of Daniel's life, though not in the way movies often exaggerate such moments. Marcus did not simply hand him a check and drive away. He sat at Daniel's kitchen table, drank coffee from a chipped mug, and asked about his life, about Lily, about Maria, about the shop where he worked. He listened more than he spoke, and when he finally addressed the reason for his visit, his tone was measured and sincere rather than performative. He explained that Whitfield Global Holdings maintained a private foundation focused on emergency response training and equipment for underserved rural communities. precisely because there were too many towns like Cedar Hollow without adequate emergency response resources near their lakes, forests, and back roads. He told Daniel that his shop, his mechanical skill, and his selfless instinct to act without hesitation represented exactly the kind of local heroism his foundation existed to support. He offered Daniel a fully funded position overseeing a new regional emergency response equipment center to be built in Cedar Hollow itself, complete with training resources for volunteers, just like Daniel had once been. He also quietly arranged a full college trust fund for Lily, not as charity, he clarified, but as gratitude that could not otherwise be repaid. Daniel, initially too stunned to respond, eventually found his voice and told Marcus plainly that he had not pulled him from that lake expecting anything in return, that he would have done the same for anyone. Marcus's expression softened at that, and he replied that this was precisely the point. Kindness offered without expectation deserved to be met the same way. In the weeks that followed, Cedar Hollow slowly transformed. The new emergency training center brought updated equipment, volunteer certifications, and a small but steady stream of new jobs to the town's modest economy. Daniel found himself, for the first time since Maria's passing, doing work that felt purposeful rather than merely necessary, training local volunteers, maintaining rescue equipment, and occasionally still fishing quietly at the end of that same dock, though now with a little more peace in his chest. Lily grew up hearing the story not as a tale of luck or fortune, but as a lesson her father repeated. Often he would tell her that the 3 black Cadillacs that arrived that morning were never really the point of the story. The point was that on an ordinary Tuesday evening, with no one watching and nothing to gain, he had simply chosen to help. Everything that came afterward, he would remind her, was proof that the world still rewards decency, even when decency asks for nothing at all. Daniel Reyes never set out to become anyone's hero, and he certainly never expected wealth or recognition for doing what he believed any person should do for another human being in danger. Yet sometimes, life has its own quiet way of returning kindness in ways no one could have predicted, reminding an entire town and everyone who later heard the story that even in the darkest, most uncertain moments, the simple decision to act with compassion can ripple outward further than we could ever imagine.